The sun was high, pouring its white fire across the prairie, when Eric's horse slowed to a halt at the edge of a dry creek bed. The land seemed to hold its breath. Cicadas hummed like unseen violins, and the wind stirred dust that shimmered like smoke. He had been riding since morning, hat pulled low against the glare, saddle leather creaking under his weight. He thought only of another long, lonesome day stretching toward evening, until he heard it. A cry. Not the cry of a coyote or calf, but a child's voice, broken and desperate, carried thin across the air. His heart stiffened. He dismounted, boots crunching the brittle earth, and moved toward the sound as though led by some force beyond himself. There, in the half-shadow of a cottonwood, he saw them. A woman slumped against the trunk, face blooded, dress torn, breath ragged as if the life had been beaten from her. And a girl, no more than 5, hair tangled, cheeks wet with dote and tears, clutching the woman's arm as though the world would end if she let go. Her small eyes found Eric's towering frame, and she froze. Then came words that would carve themselves into his soul like a brand. "Promise, you won't hurt my mama." Eric staggered, his throat tightening. He dropped to his knees in the dust, hat falling from his trembling hands. His vision blurred as he stared at the sight before him. The woman raised her head weakly, and he saw the bruises, the swelling along her jaw, the dried blood at her temple. She looked at him not with trust but with a hunted animal's fear, as though any man was danger. He could not move for a long moment, only kneel there with tears gathering against the edges of his eyes, his whole body crying without sound at what cruelty the world had done. "I won't hurt her," he whispered, voice rough with truth. "I swear to you, little one. Not her, not you." He reached for his canteen, unscrewed the cap, and slid it across the ground rather than touch the woman. She hesitated, then the child snatched it and tilted it to her mother's lips. Emily, that was her name, though he did not yet know it, sipped like someone who had been denied mercy too long. He studied her from where he knelt. Dark hair matted to her forehead, skin marked by blows, yet beneath it all a quiet dignity remained, unbroken though bent. The child, Aria, though that name too had yet to be spoken, pressed her cheek against her mother's arm as though to shield her with the weight of her tiny body. When Emily's eyes finally met his, there was no gratitude, only wariness. "Don't," she whispered hoarsely. "Don't come near." Eric nodded, his own shame bowing his head. He had seen many things on the frontier, rustlers hanged, towns burned, men drunk with power and cruelty. Yet nothing shook him like this, a beaten widow, abandoned in the open, clinging to life while her daughter begged strangers for mercy. He stood slowly and took a step back, showing his hands empty. "I'll fetch my horse," he said softly. "I'll get you to shade, to water, to safety." Her lips parted as though to protest, but no sound came. Her body sagged again against the tree. The girl clutched tighter. Eric hurried to his horse, swung into the saddle, then dismounted again with deliberate slowness, leading the animal closer. He laid his blanket in the grass, motioned gently. "Let her lie here. No harm in it." After a long pause, the child helped ease her mother onto the blanket. Emily winced but did not cry out, swallowing her pain with the stoicism of one long acquainted with suffering. The journey back to his ranch was slow. He lifted Emily into the saddle, careful not to touch her more than necessary, holding her steady with one arm as the little girl sat before them. Each mile felt like a prayer he had no words for. He felt their frailty against him, the woman too light, the child clinging with fragile determination, and something inside his chest that had been hard for years began to ache with a forgotten tenderness. By the time the cabin came into view, heat waves rippling above the roof, Emily stirred faintly. "You shouldn't," she whispered, voice so low he barely heard it. "We'll only bring you trouble." Eric slowed the horse. "You've had enough trouble," he said. "Hey, you'll have peace." But peace was never simple in the West. The ranch was modest, a weathered cabin of pine, corral fencing half-collapsed, field stretching untended toward the horizon. He carried Emily inside and laid her gently on his bed while Arya refused to leave his side. Emily kept whispering she shouldn't stay, that she was a burden, that folk would talk. And talk they did. Within days, the whispers slithered through town like smoke, lonely cowboy playing house with a widow, shame clinging to her name like dust on her skirts. Yet in the quiet of the ranch, life unfolded differently. Emily, even with her injuries, insisted on helping. She tried to cook though her hands shook, tried to sweep though her ribs pained her. Eric, patient as stone, stepped in when she faltered, adding wood to the fire, mending what she left half-mended, filling the silences not with words but with steady presence. He had always believed himself hardened by solitude, but in her silence he heard stories deeper than any campfire tale, and in her bruises he saw strength disguised as fragility. Arya, free of town's cruel whispers, began to laugh again. She chased chickens in the yard, tugged at Eric's sleeve to teach her how to braid rope, asked endless questions that left him smiling when he thought he'd forgotten how. One evening, he showed her how to tie a lasso. She giggled when she missed, frowned in fierce concentration, then finally looped the rope right. She spun toward her mother for praise. Emily's lips curved faintly, the first shadow of a smile Eric had seen. He watched it as though it were a sunrise. But shadows remained. One night by the fire, Emily spoke, eyes fixed on the flames. She told him of settlers who had accused her husband of treachery, of the beating that followed his death, of the scorn she carried wherever she went. Her voice was flat, not seeking pity, only speaking truth. Eric listened, not interrupting, not offering hollow comfort. His silence, his listening, was the only kindness she could accept. The gossip in town grew sharper. At the mercantile, women turned their backs when Emily entered with Eric. At the saloon, men laughed about the cowboy who had brought home another man's widow. The sheriff, uneasy, warned Eric one evening. "Folks are talking. Saying you're playing house." Eric gritted his teeth, but said nothing. Emily heard of it and wept alone, guilt pressing on her chest. "We should leave," she whispered to him one night. "You don't need our shame." Arya overheard, and her cry pierced the room. "No, I want to stay with him." Eric looked at the child's trembling form, then at the woman whose eyes brimmed with unspoken sorrow. He felt shame, yes, shame at his own loneliness, shame at the world's cruelty, but he also felt a rising resolve. He could no longer pretend his heart was untouched. At dawn, some days later, Emily tried to leave. Eric woke to the sound of a saddle being tightened. He stepped outside and saw her pale figure at the corral, struggling to mount a borrowed horse, Arya crying beside her. His chest seized. "Where do you think you're going?" His voice cracked, harsher than intended. She flinched, then straightened, eyes wet but defiant. "I can't be the reason you're cast out. You've shown me kindness, but we'll ruin you if we stay." He stepped closer, hands shaking. "Ruin me?" He laughed bitterly. "You're the reason I found something worth standing for." Her breath hitched. "Eric." He fell to his knees again, dust swirling around him, hands open, tears unashamed. "I promised your little girl I wouldn't hurt her mama. I intend to keep that promise, for life." The silence that followed was heavy as a storm. Emily's shoulders quaked, her fight crumbling. She collapsed into his arms, sobbing, not from weakness, but from a lifetime's weight breaking free. Arya clung to them both, laughter and tears mingling as though the child had known all along this was the moment they needed. When the sobs quieted, Eric drew a small silver band from his pocket, a ring that had once belonged to his mother. He set it gently in Emily's palm. "I've been a lonely man too long. I don't just want to protect you. I want to build with you." Emily's tears glistened as she closed her fingers over the ring. "Yes," she whispered, voice trembling. Then she looked at her daughter. "But only if you promise Arya to." Arya's eyes, wide with wonder, filled with tears. "Promise you won't hurt my mama ever." Eric placed his hand over both theirs. "Promise," he swore, his voice carrying like a vow etched into the very land. The days that followed were filled with a new kind of light. Townsfolk watched from a distance, some still whispering, some silent with respect, as the three stood together on the porch of the ranch, the sun painting gold across the plains. Eric's arm around Emily, Emily's hand resting on his chest, Arya darting about with laughter like birdsong. And if you were to stand there too, watching them against that endless horizon, you would understand what I came to learn. That love is not found in grand declarations, nor in the judgments of those who watch from shadows. It is found in the quiet keeping of promises, in tears shed without shame, in the courage to stay when the world tells you to walk away. Remember this, dear traveler. Sometimes the greatest vows are whispered not to the strong, but to the broken. And it is in keeping them that we become whole. Before you ride off, tell me where in the wide world you're watching from.